10 Myths About Israel. Ilan Pappe. Audiobook presented by the Learner's Library. Part 3. Looking Ahead. Chapter 10. The two-state solution is the only way forward. Conclusion: the settler colonial state of Israel in the 21st century. Last. Timeline. Part 3. Looking Ahead. Chapter 10. The two-state solution is the only way forward. This familiar myth is usually delivered in an affirmative voice claiming that there is a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that it is waiting for us just around the corner. However, the reality of the current colonization of vast parts of the West Bank by Israel renders any two-state solution an improbable vision. At best, the most one can hope for is a Palestinian Bantustan. But such a political arrangement would create a state with no proper sovereignty, divided into several cantons, with no means of protecting or sustaining itself independently of Israel. Any expectation of a more independent entity, should there be a miraculous change of mind on Israel's part, does not turn the two-state solution into a final act in the conflict. It is unthinkable that a national struggle for liberation, now almost 150 years old, might end with conditional autonomous rule over just 20% of the homeland. Moreover, no diplomatic accord or document could ever define who is and who is not part of the agreement. For example, it would be impossible to declare those who live in the West Bank Palestinians, but not those in the Gaza Strip. This would be the current situation, because both the Gaza Strip and many parts of Jerusalem seem to be excluded from negotiations, and are not included in the envisaged state. The two-state solution, as noted earlier, is an Israeli invention that was meant to square a circle. It responds to the question of how to keep the West Bank under Israeli control without incorporating the population that lives there. Thus it was suggested that part of the West Bank would be autonomous, a quasi-state. In return, the Palestinians would have to give up all their hopes for return, for equal rights for Palestinians in Israel, for the fate of Jerusalem, and for leading a normal life as human beings in their homeland. Any criticism of this myth is often branded as anti-Semitism. However, in many ways the opposite is true. There is a connection between the new anti-Semitism and the myth itself. The two-state solution is based on the idea that a Jewish state is the best solution for the Jewish problem, that is, Jews should live in Palestine rather than anywhere else. This notion is also close to the hearts of anti-Semites. The two-state solution, indirectly one should say, is based on the assumption that Israel and Judaism are the same. Thus, Israel insists that what it does in the name of Judaism, and when its actions are rejected by people around the world, the criticism is not only directed toward Israel, but also towards Judaism. The leader of the UK Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, attracted of a lot of criticism when he explained, to my mind correctly, that blaming Judaism for Netanyahu's policies is like blaming Islam for the actions of the Islamic State. This is a valid comparison, even if it rattled some people's sensitivities. The two-state solution is like a corpse taken out in the morgue every now and then, dressed up nicely, and presented as a living thing. When it has been proven once more that there is no life left in it, it is returned to the morgue. In the future, the only thing that might change is the United Nations admitting Palestine as a full member. At the same time, we might also see the completion of the Israeli takeover of Area C, more than 50% of the West Bank. The tension between the two, the symbolic act in the UN Security Council and the reality on the ground, may be too much for the international community to bear. The best scenario imaginable might be that such circumstances force everyone to go back to the drawing board and rethink a solution to the conflict from first principles. The charade will end soon, peacefully or violently, but either way painfully. It seems that nothing is going to stop Israel now from completing its colonization of the West Bank and continuing its siege on Gaza. This might be achieved with international blessing, but there are quite enough politicians in Israel who seem willing to proceed without that blessing. In either case, Israel will need to use brutal force to implement its vision of a solution, annexing half of the West Bank, ghettoizing the other half as well as the Gaza Strip, and imposing an apartheid regime of a sort on its own Palestinian citizens. Such a situation will render any discourse on the two-state solution irrelevant and obsolete. In ancient times, the dead were buried with their beloved artifacts and belongings. This coming funeral will probably follow a similar ritual. The most important item to go 6 feet under is the Dictionary of Illusion and Deception, with its famous entries such as, the peace process, the only democracy in the Middle East, a peace-loving nation, parity and reciprocity, and a humane solution to the refugee problem. A replacement dictionary has been in the making for many years, redefining Zionism as colonialism, Israel as an apartheid state, and the Nakba as ethnic cleansing. It will be much easier to put it into common use once the two-state solution has been pronounced dead. The maps of the dead solution will also be lying next to the body. The cartography that reduced Palestine to a tenth of its historical self, and which was presented as a map of peace, will hopefully be gone forever. There is no need to prepare an alternative map. Since 1967, the geography of the conflict has never changed in reality, even while it was constantly transformed in the discourse of liberal Zionist politicians, journalists, and academics. Palestine was always the land between the river and the sea. It still is. Its changing fortunes are characterized not by geography but by demography. The settler movement that arrived there in the late 19th century now accounts for half the population, and controls the other half through a matrix of racist ideology and apartheid policies. Peace is not a matter of demographic change, nor a redrawing of maps, it is the elimination of these ideologies and policies. Who knows, it may be easier now than ever to do this. The funeral will expose the fallacy of the Israeli mass protest movement of 2012, while at the same time highlighting its positive potential. For 7 weeks in that summer, middle-class Israeli Jews protested in huge numbers against their government's social and economic policies. In order to ensure as big a protest as possible, its leaders and coordinators did not dare mention occupation, colonization, or apartheid. The source of every evil, they claimed, was the brutal capitalist policies of the government. On a certain level, they had a point. These policies prevented the master race of Israel from enjoying fully and equally the fruits of Palestine's rape and dispossession. However, a fairer division of the spoils will not ensure a normal life for either Jews or Palestinians, only an end to the looting and pillaging will. And yet the demonstrators also expressed their skepticism and distrust concerning what their media and politicians tell them about the socio-economic reality. This may open the way for a better understanding of the lies they have been fed about the conflict and their national security over so many years. The funeral should energize us all to follow the same distribution of labor as before. As urgently as ever, Palestinians need to solve the issue of representation. And the progressive Jewish forces in the world need to be more intensively recruited to the BDS and solidarity campaigns. In Palestine itself, the time has come to move the discourse of the one-state solution into political action, and maybe to adopt the new dictionary. Since the dispossession is everywhere, the repossession and reconciliation will have to occur everywhere. If the relationship between Jews and Palestinians is to be reframed on a just and democratic basis, then we can accept neither the old, buried map of the two-state solution nor its logic of partition. This also means that the sacred distinction between Jewish settlements in Israel, before 1967, and those in the West Bank, after 1967, should be consigned to the grave as well. The distinction should instead be made between those Jews who are willing to discuss a reformulation of the relationship, a change of regime, and equal status, and those who are not, regardless of where they live now. There are some surprising phenomena in this respect if one studies the human and political fabric of contemporary Israel-Palestine. The willingness to enter into dialogue is sometimes more evident beyond the green line than inside it. The dialogues within about a change of regime, the question of representation, and the BDS campaign are all part and parcel of the same effort to bring justice and peace to Palestine. Once the two-state solution is buried, one major obstacle to a just peace in Israel and Palestine will have been removed. Conclusion. The settler colonial state of Israel in the 21st century. In 2017, the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip will have lasted for 50 years. After such a long period, the term occupation becomes somewhat redundant and irrelevant. 2 generations of Palestinians have already lived under this regime. Although they themselves will still call it occupation, what they are living through is rooted in something else much harder to defeat or change: colonization. The term colonization, as I noted in the opening chapters, is not easily applied to the present. It is more often than not associated with past events. This is why, with the help of recent and exciting research, scholars writing on Israel are more frequently using another term: settler colonialism. Colonialism can be described as the movement of Europeans to different parts of the world, creating new white nations where indigenous people had once had their own kingdoms. These nations could only be created if the settlers employed 2 logics: the logic of elimination, getting rid by all means possible of the indigenous people, including by genocide, and the logic of dehumanization, regarding the non-Europeans as inferior and thus as not deserving the same rights as the settlers. In South Africa, these twin logics led to the creation of the apartheid system, founded officially in 1948, the same year that the Zionist movement translated the same logics into an ethnic cleansing operation in Palestine. As this book attempts to show, from a settler colonial perspective, events such as the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Oslo process, and the disengagement from Gaza in 2005 are all part of the same Israeli strategy of taking as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. The means of achieving this goal have changed over time, and it remains uncompleted. However, it is the main fuel that feeds the fire of the conflict. In this manner, the horrific connection between the logics of dehumanization and elimination, so apparent in the spread of European settler colonialism throughout the world, first found its way into the authoritarian states of the Middle East. It was ruthlessly manifest, among a multitude of other examples, in the destruction of the Kurds by Saddam Hussein, as well as in the punitive actions carried out by the Assad regime in 2012. It was then also employed by groups opposing that regime, the worst example being the genocidal policies of the Islamic State. This barbarization of human relations in the Middle East can only be stopped by the people of the region themselves. However, they should be aided by the outside world. Together, the region should return to its not-so-distant past, when the guiding principle was live and let live. No serious discussion about ending human rights abuses in the region as a whole can bypass a conversation about the 100 years of human rights abuses in Palestine. The two are intimately connected. The exceptionalism enjoyed by Israel, and before that by the Zionist movement, makes a mockery of any Western critique of human rights abuses in the Arab world. Any discussion of the abuse of the Palestinians' human rights needs to include an understanding of the inevitable outcome of settler colonial projects such as Zionism. The Jewish settlers are now an organic and integral part of the land. They cannot, and will not, be removed. They should be part of the future, but not on the basis of the constant oppression and dispossession of the local Palestinians. We have wasted years talking about the two-state solution as if it had any relevance to the issue described above. But we needed that time to persuade both Israeli Jews and the world at large that when you found a state, even one with a thriving culture, a successful high-tech industry, and a powerful military, on the basis of dispossessing another people, your moral legitimacy will always be questioned. Confining the question of legitimacy only to the territories Israel occupied in 1967 will never resolve the issue at the heart of the problem. Of course, it will help if Israel withdraws from the West Bank, but there is a possibility that it will just monitor the region in the same way it has policed the Gaza Strip since 2006. This will not hasten an end to the conflict, it will just transform it into a conflict of a different kind. There are deep layers of history that will need to be addressed if a genuine attempt is to be made at a resolution. After World War II, Zionism was allowed to become a colonialist project at a time when colonialism was being rejected by the civilized world, because the creation of a Jewish state offered Europe, and West Germany in particular, an easy way out of the worst excesses of anti-Semitism ever seen. Israel was the first to declare its recognition of a new Germany. In return, it received a lot of money, but also, far more importantly, a carte blanche to turn the whole of Palestine into Israel. Zionism offered itself as the solution to anti-Semitism, but became the main reason for its continued presence. The ideal also failed to uproot the racism and xenophobia that still lies at the heart of Europe, and which produced Nazism on the continent and a brutal colonialism outside of it. That racism and xenophobia is now turned against Muslims and Islam, since it is intimately connected to the Israel-Palestinian question. It could be reduced once a genuine answer to that question is found. We all deserve a better ending to the story of the Holocaust. This could involve a strong multicultural Germany showing the way to the rest of Europe, an American society dealing bravely with the racial crimes of its past that still resonate today, an Arab world that expunges its barbarism and inhumanity. Nothing like that could happen if we continue to fall into the trap of treating mythologies as truths. Palestine was not empty and the Jewish people had homelands. Palestine was colonized, not irredeemed, and its people were dispossessed in 1948, rather than leaving voluntarily. Colonized people, even under the UN Charter, have the right to struggle for their liberation, even with an army, and the successful ending to such a struggle lies in the creation of a democratic state that includes all of its inhabitants. A discussion of the future, liberated from the 10 myths about Israel, will hopefully not only help to bring peace to Israel and Palestine, but will also help Europe reach a proper closure on the horrors of World War II and the dark era of colonialism. Timeline: 1881. Waves of Russian pogroms lasting until 1884. The Zionist movement appears in Europe. 1882. First Aliyah, 1882 to 1904. The foundation of Rishon LeZion, Zikron Yaakov, and Rosh Pina in Palestine. 1897. The First Zionist Congress in Basel. The establishment of the World Zionist Congress. 1898. The Second Zionist Congress. 1899. The Third Zionist Congress. 1901. The Jewish National Fund, JNF, founded. 1904. The Second Aliyah, 1904-14. 1908. The Palestine Office is established. In 1929 it became the Jewish Agency. 1909. Degania, the first kibbutz, Kvutzat Degania, is founded. The building of Tel Aviv. The Hashomer founded. 1915-16. The Hussein-McMahon Correspondence. 1916. The Sykes-Picot Agreement. 1917. The Balfour Declaration. Britain occupies Palestine and governs it through a military administration, until 1920. 1920. The Haganah is founded. The Histadrut is founded. The San Remo Conference grants Britain the mandate over Palestine. 1922. Britain recognizes Transjordan as a separate political entity and Emir Abdullah as its ruler. The U.S. Congress endorses the Balfour Declaration. 1923. The British mandate over Palestine and Transjordan is authorized first by the League of Nations, then at the Treaty of Lausanne. 1931. The Irgun splits from the Haganah. 1936. Arab revolt breaks out and would last until 1939. 1937. The Peel Royal Commission. 1940. Lehi, Stern Gang, splits from the Irgun. The Village Files project launched. 1946. The Anglo-American Commission of Inquiry. 1947. Britain announces the end of the mandate and transfers the question of Palestine to the UN. The UN forms a special committee, UNSCOP, which recommends partition. This is approved by the United Nations General Assembly, Resolution 181. 1948. The ethnic cleansing of Palestine, British mandate ends. The State of Israel declared and recognized by the United States and the USSR. Israel at war with troops entering Palestine from neighboring Arab countries while completing the expulsion of half of Palestine's population, demolishing half of its villages, and emptying and destroying 11 of its 12 towns. 1949. UNGA Resolution 194, calling for the return of the Palestinian refugees. Armistice agreements between Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. Military rule is imposed on the remaining Palestinian citizens inside Israel, which will remain in place until 1966. 1950. The immigration of Jews from Arab countries begins. 1956. Israel joins Britain and France in a war against Egypt's Nasser, occupying the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. The Kafr Qasim Massacre. 1959. Wadi Salib riots, Mizrahi riots in Haifa protesting discrimination. 1963. The end of the Ben-Gurion era. 1967. The Six-Day War, Israel occupies the Sinai and the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. UNSC Resolution 242 calls on Israel to withdraw from all occupied territories. Israeli settlement project in the West Bank and Gaza begins. 1973. The October War. Israel occupies part of Egypt proper and retains control of the Golan Heights after a bloody conflict that took the state by surprise. 1974. UN Security Council Resolution 338 reaffirms the rights of the Palestinians to self-determination and national independence. 1976. The Land Day protests of the Palestinians in Israel against the Judaization of the Galilee. 1977. The Likud under Menachem Begin wins the national elections after 30 years of labor rule. President Anwar Sadat of Egypt visits Jerusalem and begins bilateral talks with Israel. 1978. Peace treaty signed between Israel and Egypt. PLO attack on Tel Aviv reciprocated by Operation Litani. Israel occupies part of southern Lebanon. 1981. Annexation of the Golan Heights to Israel. 1982. Sinai returned to Egypt. Operation Peace for the Galilee, in which Israel invades Lebanon in an attempt to destroy the PLO. 1987. The First Palestinian Intifada. 1989. Collapse of the USSR and mass migration of Jews and non-Jews from across the Eastern Bloc to Israel. 1991. First Gulf War. U.S. convenes International Conference on Palestine in Madrid. 1992. Labor returns to power and Yitzhak Rabin becomes Prime Minister for the second time. 1993. The PLO and Israel sign the Oslo Declaration of Principles in the White House. 1994. The Palestinian National Authority is formed and Yasser Arafat, the PLO chairman, arrives in the occupied territories to become president of the PNA. Israel and Jordan sign peace treaty. 1995. Oslo II signed, interim agreement for Palestinian control of parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated. 1996. Likud returns to power and the first Benjamin Netanyahu government is formed. 1999. Labor's Ehud Barak elected as Prime Minister. 2000. Israel withdraws from southern Lebanon. The Second Intifada erupts. 2001. Ariel Sharon, head of the Likud, elected as Prime Minister. Later forms his own party, Kadima, and wins the 2005 elections. 2002. The West Bank Wall project is approved, implementation begins in 2003. 2005. Sharon re-elected. Boycott, divestment and sanctions movement is launched. Israel evacuates from Gaza settlements and military bases. 2006. Hamas wins the elections for the Second Palestinian Legislative Council, PLC. Israel, the Middle East Quartet, United States, Russia, United Nations, and European Union, several Western states, and the Arab states impose sanctions on the Palestinian Authority, suspending all foreign aid. The siege on Gaza begins. Second Lebanon War and Israeli assault on the Gaza Strip. 2006. Ehud Olmert elected as Prime Minister. In February 2016, Olmert began a 19-month prison sentence for bribery and obstruction of justice. 2008. Gaza War, Operation Cast Lead. The UN and human rights organizations count more than 1,400 Palestinian deaths, of which 926 were unarmed civilians. 3 Israeli civilians were killed and 6 soldiers. 2009-13. Second Netanyahu government. 2011. Social protest across Israel, the Tent Movement. 2012. Operation Pillar of Cloud. 4 Israeli civilians and 2 soldiers were killed in Palestinian rocket attacks. According to the UN, 174 Palestinians in total died, 107 of them civilians. 2013-15. Third Netanyahu government. 2014. Operation Protective Edge. According to the main estimates, between 2,125 and 2,310 Gazans were killed, 1,492 civilians, including 551 children and 299 women, and between 10,626 and 10,895 were wounded, including 3,374 children, of whom over 1,000 were left permanently disabled. 66 Israeli soldiers, 5 Israeli civilians, including 1 child, and 1 Thai civilian were killed, and 469 IDF soldiers and 261 Israeli civilians were injured. Israel destroyed about 17,000 homes, and partially destroyed 30,000. 2015. Fourth Netanyahu government.